Hi, I'm Fred Stoeker, and I'm here to talk about sexual addictions and recovery. I have a friend with me today, a very good friend. His name is Phil Van Horn, and he's very committed to the process of helping men get set free. He is a missionary to men, actually, here in America, and he is wanting to talk a little bit about what he's seeing as he ministers to men across this nation. And I've heard some of the stories. They're great. And I would also like to just have him share those stories, and I'll comment on them a little bit myself, but I'm pretty excited about the morning. How you doing, Phil?
Hey, Fred, thanks for letting me be your guest. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Sure. Um, you've become a missionary to men here just recently, and I'd like to have you just tell people what's going on and what you're doing.
Yeah. So I started ministering to men about 15 to 20 years ago, first in small Bible studies. I was actually, the first time I did it, I was a college baseball coach, and I started leading Bible studies. And I got bit by the bug. And then about 15 years ago, I started attending and then leading men's ministry groups. It means a lot to me. I'm very grateful for it. At an early age, I saw a couple of really good examples of what not to do from my
Yes.
father and another family member. And then I saw later, as I began to mature, a really good example of what to do. One of my a late brother was an especially good man, believer, and he did some mission work as well. Uh, so ministering to men is important to me. God always lets me know that when I'm around, oh gosh, a table, a small group, or a large or big group of men, I'm where I'm supposed to be. And it's very rewarding. So thanks for this opportunity.
Let's take a break and talk a little bit about this book that Phil and I have mentioned in the podcast. It's called Every Man's Battle. And I wrote this battle to teach men the practical steps that I took to get free from sexual sin. God taught me every one of the truths in this book. I take no credit, but I do want men to know that there are steps they can take to be free. You want freedom? I say pick up a copy and get on the battlefield. As you talk, I think back to when my son Jason was back in college. He was the head of a campus crusade group. And on that particular weekend, all of the different Christian college campus ministries kind of met together in a very large men's event with a large local church there. So what you had was a big men's event with men of all ages. And at one point, they broke up into what we would call small groups, but it was such a big men's event that a small group was 21 people, which is a lot. But they were going around in a circle, and they were essentially asking the question, how are you doing with your sexuality and the integrity you have towards your sexuality? And out of the 21 guys, my son was the only one who had true biblical integrity when it came to his sexuality. And he was stunned to have that percentage of men struggling. And the very first thing he did when he came back after that weekend was he thanked me because he said, Dad, I don't know what I'd do if I was struggling like that. And it was because you taught me how to handle my sexuality that I'm able to live free of this and to help other guys. So I wanted to ask you, I know that when you go out and be the missionary to men that you are, you're meeting with small groups like that all the time. What are you seeing out there when it comes to sexual purity as opposed to sexual sin?
Well, you just asked the question, what am I seeing? All right. So I lead about 4 to 6 weekly small groups, and then I do quarterly and large scale retreats and men's ministry events, sometimes 4 to 7 a year. So I'm regularly in front of guys.
Yes.
Here's what I'm experiencing, what I see and what I hear is regularly, if I'm around, let's say 8 guys, 6 of the 8 by the end of the time where we get to know each other well, or by the time that defenses come down, 6 out of the 8 have some form of sexual challenge. It could be pornography, could be masturbation, or it could be some form of sexual deviancy of they were a victim of sexual assault or they perpetrated sexual assault. And it's that common right now. Now, Fred, I've learned from you that, I mean, over the last 25 years, that's been a thing for guys. Of
Yes.
course, the lockdown it did no favors for us. The lockdown was terrible for men from 12 to the last breath, just really bad. And so it's become a common thing for guys, for guys that are believers. Guys in church are no different in terms of statistically the rate at which they're looking at porn and have problems with masturbation, no different from guys outside of church. Now, Fred, this is where you've helped me a lot. Is Let's take a couple of examples here. A guy is in a group or something that I'm a part of, and they say, they're in their 40s. And in fact, without using a name, I'll give you a specific example, and you can coach me through this, which is what we've been teaming up on. As a guy comes to me and says, Phil, I prayed and I am clean. I've had a 25-year sexual addiction to porn. Uh, Guys rarely will come clean and say that masturbation's also part of it, but it is.
Yes,
And
it is.
he says, I'm clean now. What do I do next? And then, Fred, I come to you and I say, okay, Fred, they think they're clean, and we praise God they are, but there's a next step to that too. And that's in your most recent book. And that's part of how we team up and part of applying what we're learning.
Yes, and the truth of the matter is that there are two parts of winning this battle. Number one is engaging the battle. Now, guys engage the battle in different ways, but I know this gentleman you're talking about, he told you that he went cold turkey on both porn and masturbation, and he's kind of like, okay, now what's next? Well, there's a second part of winning this battle that's really, really important to understand, and that's that while you can quit cold turkey, um, if you quit quickly, I praise God a lot because my battle wasn't like that. And I would have liked to have quit that quickly. But one of the things that I learned through the actual footwork and hand battles of the battle is I learned how to form character in myself, um, disciplines, self-control with my eyes, with my mind. I learned how to, for instance, take thoughts captive. I learned how to bounce my eyes away from the sensuality in my environment so that I didn't fall back again in the future. And as I've said before on podcasts, I've been free for over 30 years. And I'm not just saying no porn, no masturbation. I'm also saying I haven't gone on computers to search for something dark or lusty to look at. I haven't surfed channels. It's just not something that I do anymore. That's true freedom. And what I fear for anyone where it happens too quickly is that they haven't formed the defenses then to make sure they stay pure. I remember a story. It was my very first year in ministry after Every Man's Battle came out. And I was talking to a guy in Grand Island, Nebraska. And he came up to me after I spoke and he said, I want to tell you a story. And I'm always into stories. I want to hear how men are fighting, how they're winning. And he had told me in his case, he had come down to that very altar on a Sunday night after a service. And he was praying about his lust. And he said that he saw this veil kind of float down from heaven, kind of like a wedding veil. And as it settled around his shoulders, he felt all of his lust leave his body. And he was amazed. And not, I don't know what you think about visions, and I don't know what my theologies are. I'm just sharing the story because he has a compelling story. And for 6 months, he was without any lust. I mean, he wasn't looking at porn, he wasn't masturbating. Well, then came summertime, he looked across the street and saw a girl in a halter top that was way too small, and she was, kind of falling out everywhere. And he was just captivated. And as she came across the street at the red light, he just kept staring at her, staring at her. His systems kind of got overloaded in his sexuality. He went up to his office, shut the door, and said, I really need to look at a little porn here to calm down. She really had me going. Well, that's like saying to your son at the end of a nice night of camping, hey, son, go put out the fire, take this gasoline can. That's the very worst thing you can do. And he said he looked at porn a little that day, looked at porn a couple days later, and pretty soon he was as hooked as he had ever been. So, getting set free instantly is wonderful. But we still need to talk about the disciplines that are important in our lives to stay free. Now, in my book, Every Man's Battle,
Yeah.
I talk very extensively about the details of building defenses, guarding the eyes, guarding the mind, guarding the heart. And then in my more recent book, my book, Battle On, Battle Over, what I've done there is talk about the second vulnerability of male sexuality, which is the way that our sexuality is basically tied to the wounds and the stresses in our life and how we often use it for medication. Um, those are our two vulnerabilities, our eyes, and then that second one I just mentioned. And if you can put defenses around both of those, you will be free for decades. If you don't, you can't really count on the fact that you'll be free for decades because there are things that'll trip you up in those vulnerabilities. And if you don't understand them, and if you don't set up the defenses, um, the enemy can send in a cruise missile at any time and blow your life apart. So that's sort of how I talk about it.
As a missionary to men, I regularly recommend your book. And I have a funny story about Every Man's Battle. Mike Yorkie, are both our good friends, and Mike help with cracking the man code. There we go.
Yes.
The book that Pete McKenzie and I collaborated with Mike on. So good story about that. Lived in the Pasadena area for my wife and I and our kids live there. And we lived in a very crowded residential area. And as you came down from that, there was a double-sized billboard there that had a woman wearing very little clothing. You couldn't avoid seeing it. Uh,
Right.
I read your book, and it was there for a long time. I read your book, Every Man's Battle, and I started to bounce the eyes. In fact, that was my test case. I learned to bounce my eyes by saying,
Yes.
you can't miss it. The way the street was angled, you had to see this massive billboard of this woman model wearing very little clothing. I don't even remember what the ad was for. So I see it bounce away. And I've taught dozens of men the same principle and encouraged them to buy the book, Every Man's Battle. And Fred, I've told you this before. Occasionally, I'll officiate a wedding and I do premarital counseling. And part of the premarital counseling is it's mandatory for the guy to read Every Man's Battle and then do a report to his fiance before they get
Mm.
married about his commitment to bounce his eyes. Now, I wish I had Battle On, Battle Over at that time because then I would encourage both of them to do the same, which is
Yes.
something that already a friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, you were on a podcast with Christopher Lee on the Wealthy Kingdom podcast, and
Hmm.
Christopher said that he and his wife were going through Battle On, Battle Over together. That's a win. That is definitely a win. Now, I also use Battle On, Battle Over because of what you've taught me is it's not often it's not enough just to bounce the eyes, that there's a mentality or to this or science to this as well. And for some guys, that gets right to the root of the problem. Very grateful for your ministry and how it applies to my ministry and leading guys. Because whether I'm
Yeah.
around a dozen or, gosh, I was just with 250 guys from all over the world. Last fall, the 1,300 guys. it doesn't matter. At some point, if you're around men and you're ministering to them, this subject of sexual addiction, porn, masturbation, that's going to come up. It's unavoidable given where we stand right now in culture. And every man's battle and battle on, battle over are definitely working and are the kind of things I encourage people to read and to share. And I say that within ministry circles as well.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. So I started, Every Man's Battle was released in the year 2000. Now, since then, we have rewritten it. It's so that there's a 20th anniversary version that's very updated. It includes a lot of the brain science that we wouldn't have even known back in the year 2000, but now I've tied it in. And the great thing is the brain science backs up everything we said in the first version. So that was very satisfying for me, as you might guess. But the interesting thing about Every Man's Battle and starting to travel the world speaking about this, the title of the book is Every Man's Battle. And but you might ask, does that mean the men in Argentina? Does that mean the men in South Africa? Does that mean the men in Ireland or in China or in Japan? And the amazing thing, I've spoken in Ireland, South Africa, Indonesia, Costa Rica. I mean, I've been around, and there is no difference between the men in those countries and the men in this country. I mean to tell you, they've got the two same vulnerabilities, the eye gate, and then that second vulnerability of how we can use medication to deal with our wounds instead of going to God with those wounds. And what happens is it becomes a very, very addictive process for us and everywhere. And so if you've ever wondered, I wonder if people in Africa, deal with the same thing. But, I've talked to guys in Kenya. It just doesn't matter where I go. Um, Now, one of the things that I really wanted you to share this morning is a story that you shared with me the other day where you were with a group of men and at, you know, somewhere in the conversation, a couple of the guys were practically panicked asking you to pray for them, asking the group to pray for them. They wanted so badly to be free. Can you share that story?
So I'm in a ministry group. We'll call this a mid-sized group. I'm in a group of guys, about 40 guys, and one of the men just blurted out how he and his son shared the same challenge with sexual addiction, and they wanted to be free. And as soon as that one person did, a second did. And then we heard a groan from the crowd. Clearly, it was more than just these two men. In fact, Fred, I think that's where this all is going is there are fathers in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who are sharing the same and need to break that cycle of sexual addiction with their sons who are in their teens, 20s, and 30s. That's exactly what's happening. And this became a very passionate, out loud, like Baptist tent revival, screaming, yelling, uh, really forceful prayer intervention of, I need help. My son needs help. I can't believe I passed this on to the next generation. That's something you talk about in the books. And it became this really, we'll call it full contact ministry because of the intensity of these two men who just immediately let it out and just said, I have this problem. My son has this problem. I can't believe I passed that on to him. I have other sons. They're coming along. I'm going to guess that they will have the same problem. Please help. I need help now.
It's time for another break, and I just want to talk for a minute about Battle on, Battle Over. I consider this book the most important book I've ever written. I wrote it with my wife, and the two things that are important in my mind is that number one, this book addresses female sexual addiction, which most books don't. The second thing is it teaches wives how to saddle up with their husbands and help fight this battle with them. So it becomes more than every man's battle, it's every couple's battle. Every wife wants to have a marriage of her dreams, okay? And This book will help her understand how her sexuality and his sexuality need to come together in order to find the freedom that they desire together. I remember those days
Yeah.
where I was so worried about passing this on to my son. And then, of course, later I had a second son. You know, there's a couple of things I want to say about this, Phil, because there are some things that men don't always fully comprehend about this situation. Number one is men have a tendency to view this as entirely a spiritual issue. All of the masturbation, the porn, and they tend to view it as if, hey, if I just loved God more, if I just prayed more, I would be free. Okay. So let me ask you a question, anybody that's listening. What if a heroin addict came up to you and said, you know, if I could just love God more and pray more, this heroin addiction would just go away? Um, no, you would laugh at that, literally laugh at that, because what you would say is, no, no, there's a physical component here. You have to stop taking heroin for this to go away. We first need to take the drug away, and then we need to deal with the issues inside you, whatever that might be, wounds, brokenness, whatever. It might just be your eyes have gotten into bad habits, but we have to then deal with the issues underneath it. And what guys tend to do, because of the way that it's been spoken about in the Western church, and in fact, the Eastern church, I mean, it's always talked about the same way that, look, just calm down. This is the age of grace. Just pray about it. The Lord's going to take care of it. But let me tell you something, Phil. I never wanted to just relax in this and hope that the Lord would one day take it away. I wanted to destroy this. I wanted to crucify it like the Bible talks about. Because you know what? People were counting on me. I used to watch my son. Gosh, he was my firstborn. He was a toddler at the time. And, I used to be a football player and probably can't tell that now, but I used to be. And the thing about it was the first toy I gave him, besides this little puffy dinosaur, was a small football. And he used to walk around with his football in one hand and a stick in the other. He looked like a little king with his scepter in one hand, the football in the other. And he used to walk around our apartment. He'd look up at me with these shiny eyes, and I knew what his eyes were saying. They were saying, Daddy, you're amazing. I love you. I want to grow up to be just like you. And I have to tell you, there were many times it's just him and me at home. Brenda would be off somewhere, and I would burst into tears, and it would be so confusing for him, I'm sure. But I would literally burst into tears. Say, don't become like me. I'd scream on the inside because I knew who I was. I was hooked on porn. I was hooked on sexual sin, and I knew from the Bible that those things get passed on. I've talked to guys who are experts in spiritual warfare, and what they say, what they always see is that if the enemy has a deed into your life as the father, into a certain area of your life, the enemy has a deed into your children's life in those same areas. Now, I don't know where they back that up with, but I can tell you in 30 years of ministering on these things, I see it regularly. The same things are happening with the sons that are happening with the fathers. And I knew about it then, though, just biblically. And here's the thing. Um, I would wake up also on Saturdays, when it's just Brenda and I waking up slow. She always wakes up after me. I'm a real early riser. And I would lay in bed with her sleeping softly next to me. And I would look at the ceiling and scream silent screams at God. Why did you give me a son? I can't help him. You're so cruel to give me a son. Now I have to watch him go through what I went through. But the thing is, uh, God gave me a son because he knew, number one, is that would give me the impetus to rise up and learn how to win this thing. And then he was going to prove through my son that just like the sin can be passed on to the son, the righteousness can be passed on by me learning how to live righteously and teaching my son how to live righteously. And you know what? It's happened with both my sons. Neither of them have struggled with the same thing. So I guess the thing I first of all want to say is that, this is more than just a spiritual problem. There are physical aspects to it where you can teach your sons how to keep that sexual chemistry from being released into their brain, changing their sexuality, changing the way they deal with problems in their life. Okay. And there are actually steps that you can take, which I've laid out in Every Man's Battle and Battle on, Battle Over. Now, it's not like there's no spiritual side of it. Okay. I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea. In fact, the main thing that in my opinion, I mean, everybody that reads the book will have to make their own opinion when they read Battle on, Battle Over. But I can tell you that chapter 6, in my mind, as the author, is the most crucial chapter in the book. What it teaches men to do is how to not just do it, but to do it effectively, how to worship one on one, worship God one on one, singing out loud to God in your own private place, and build intimacy with Him. Now, most guys have never sung out loud to God by themselves in their quiet time. It's not something that's taught. Okay, but I can tell you that is the thing that put the final nail in the coffin when it came to my sexual sin. I kind of went from 85% free to 100% free, and the rest has been history. Now, so here's the thing. You told the story about men basically in desperation and the full, the full court press prayer wise. Um, absolutely, we need to pray. Absolutely, we need to pray that men are released on the spot. However, in my ministry, for every one guy that's released on the spot, another 10,000 have to fight their way through the jungle and win. And that's a good thing because the fight teaches you the character and the perseverance you need to stay strong. But the other thing is that you can also spiritually get closer to the Lord, which forms deeper, genuine intimacy in your life, which then makes it less important to get the false intimacy that we get through porn and masturbation. And our desires for God become stronger than our desires for the sexual sin. So in the end, we actually do win the battle with spiritual strength, but we can't ignore the physical things we need to teach our sons, the physical things we need to teach ourselves, and to stand together as warriors to win on the battlefield. Does that make sense to you?
It does. I want to give you another question for you to answer because the solutions, this is fighting sexual addiction is such a multi-layered,
It
multifaceted
is.
challenge. That's why the book Every Man's Battle and the book Battle on, Battle Over, and following you on social has such value because one guy will come to me and say something like, I have a challenge with porn, and and I won't right away say, "Oh, you're addicted." But when I get to that, they'll say, "No, no, no, I'm not addicted. I just need it every couple of weeks or once a week." And I'll say, if I said to you, you only needed heroin once a week or every other week, what would you say? And it dawns on them, oh my gosh, I'm addicted. And I'll say, how long has this been going on? 30 years.
Yes.
And I'll say, okay, you should pick up the Every Man's Battle. You should read Battle on, Battle Over and see what applies to you and combine that knowledge with your prayer life. Um,
Yes.
your line that you've taught me about, and guys will say, I just need a little bit of porn, and women too. I just need a little bit of porn to make things easy. And I said, well, would you say to a heroin addict, oh, I just need a little bit of heroin to make me stay on recovery. And they'd say, well, of course not. There are tips like that make perfect sense. Now, Fred, one of the challenges that you and I've talked about is a guy comes to me and says, or I'm sorry, one of the challenges you've talked about, a gal comes to me and says, Phil,
Yes.
my husband is addicted to porn, and he's so addicted, he wants to divorce me instead of do anything about it. And I just think that's the most outlandish thing possible. And Fred, you've heard that story. We've shared that before, and that is outlandish. That's amazing.
Well, yes. I mean, if you think about how God created men, okay, so God created men to essentially be the leaders of their home, but the defenders of their home more than anything. And we were men were created in the image of God, and the Bible says in Exodus that God is a warrior. Warrior is His name, and I think that aspect of God was very much placed into the heart of the male gender. And so our role in life is often to fight big battles, live great adventures, and to defend the beauty in our life, which would be our wives,
Yeah.
our kids. Okay. And so when you are thinking about a man like the man that you just talked about, he has absolutely turned his back completely on manhood. He's not willing to fight the battle. He's not even willing to conceive of this as a great adventure to see if you can rise up, beat the enemy at his game, okay, and come out on top so that the enemy doesn't have your number anymore. You have his number and he can't touch you. All right. And then you have a wife who's hungry for connection. And we know from science that masturbation and porn does just the opposite. It changes the way that our brains process our sexuality, and it makes us less likely to want to please our wives or make sure our wives have pleasure. Um, I have talked to many wives through the years who will tell me I can be right in the middle of sex with my husband, and I can tell he's not engaged with me. He's engaged with some fantasy of some woman he saw in pornography that he's literally picturing her in his mind while he's penetrating me in the bed. And you can imagine how crushing that is to a woman. Women were created to be in relationship with men. Okay, that's their main role. And you basically, when you're a man like this, rejecting your wife and choosing porn instead, you're. I mean, it's the complete opposite of what that relationship is supposed to look like. Then, if you're like me, okay, you're from a broken home. Your dad has a lot of mistresses. He's looking at porn. All right. What happens in the heart of a young man? Well, first of all, um, he's not there to give me the help I need as I'm trying to grow through puberty and through my high school years, trying to figure out how I'm supposed to handle my sexuality. All right. And then the other thing is he leaves our house in complete disarray and fear. He's supposed to be the one that's guiding it in strength. And so here I have a broken mother who I hear crying through the walls at night over her broken marriage. My room's right next to hers. And, you know, I also hear how scared she is about trying to support our family. And fear is everywhere. And so it's not just him chasing his sexual things. He's leaving his family not just in a place where they don't know how to handle their own sexuality, but even how to live life without fear. There's no one to defend them. All right. And so men, okay, from the earliest age, what happens to men is they start, because of the heavy sensuality of our culture, uh, at some point they experiment with masturbation or they see a movie that gets them really excited, they end up masturbating, whatever, and it starts to become a habit, and they get it in their minds that they really can't control this. The best they can do is manage it, And it never even occurs to them that they can rise up and kill this thing. And that is maybe the most common misconception I see among men, that there's actually a way to win. What most men think is that, well, God made me sexual. I can't help it. My wife, we have two kids under the age of 2, and she's tired all the time, and but I need my sexuality. I need to take care of this. And so instead of talking with your wife and learning how to connect even in the hard times, and learning how to fight together to live a righteous life when it comes to your sexuality together, you just take things into your own hands. You say to yourself, I can't win this anyway. Nobody can. Everybody I talk to at the club, they all say you can't. And so it's like everybody capitulates before they even pick up their weapons. And my thought is that's probably the main reason in America that women have trouble with men, because we just have given up. Our sexuality dominates our lives instead of our Christianity. And we just let our penis lead us around. We're like a dog chasing his tail. And we don't even admit that it's possible to even take the first step to fight it. But I'm here to tell you, there is nothing in my life, and I've been successful in everything I've done, and I don't say that with pride. It's just the way that it's turned out. I was successful in sports. I was successful in college, in school. I was successful uh, in my business for all these years, very successful. And then I was successful when I began writing, because I was writing about a really strong felt need that men really needed some help on. Okay. But the thing is that um, of all those things, the thing that has made me literally develop my manhood the most, and the thing that has given me the complete satisfaction of knowing I'm not only a son of God by position, but I actually look like one in my actions, both out in public and in the secret places where no one sees. And there has been nothing in my life that's been a bigger battle or a greater adventure than winning that battle and then passing those truths on to my kids so they could win their battle. I mean, it's fun. And men are missing out. You're really missing out if you don't fight this battle, because I believe that our sexuality is like the tree in the middle of the garden in Eden. I believe it's the test. I believe it's the test of our will. Do you love God more, or do you love this other stuff more? And it's through making that decision day after day, saying, I am going to put my sexuality under my spirituality and allow God to grow me. It's that process that makes us mature in Christ in ways that I can't think of anything else that really does it that well. So that's kind of how I see it and have seen it ever since I became a Christian. And I just knew, okay, this thing has to die. I don't know how, but this thing has to die. Here's another break. I want you to know that I travel a lot and speak to churches and men's groups about sexual purity and how men and women can get free. Um, if you want me to come and speak to your own groups, all you have to do is go to fredstoker.com, and there's a spot there where you can send me an email and we can talk. Would love to meet you, would love to meet your people.
You're bringing up questions. I have questions for you because you
Okay.
just covered a lot of material. Now, Mike Yorkie and I teamed up with Pete McKenzie to write this book, Cracking the Man Code, about ministering to men. And it
Yes, and I
really, we were
recommend
trying,
that book, everyone, by the way. It's
thank you.
yeah.
We wrote that because Pete has traveled the world for the past 50 years ministering to men. Other than maybe the Reverend Dr. Tony Evans out of Dallas, Pete has probably been in front of more men globally than any other person. And he's still very active today. And chapter number 3 is sex, marriage, and sexual integrity.
Yeah.
And that's not going to change. Now, Fred, here's my question to you. If you were to rewrite, or if you were to write today, every young man's battle and every young woman's battle, given what we're learning about the average age that kids are being exposed to porn is age 9. If you
Yeah.
were to rewrite those today, how would they be the same? And how would they be the different? And how could you counsel parents today on dealing with young adults who are now, let's say, 18 to 22, and they've been addicted for a decade? How would
Yeah.
you deal with that?
Well, the first thing I would say is that if I was rewriting them, I would explain to young men and women how the brain actually works in the same way that I rewrote Every Man's Battle to bring in how the brain works and processes sexuality. You see, the thing is, number one is the brain is our largest sex organ in the human species. So everything about your sexuality processes through the brain, and our behavior, the things that we do, whether it's masturbation or whatever we do in the backseat of the car with our girlfriend, these things literally do change. That behavior literally does change who we are in our brains and how we process our sexuality, but especially the porn and the masturbation. And so if I were rewriting it, I would have to include that because here's the situation I see when it comes to teens, okay? Um, I am appalled by the way that young people don't give enough credence to the Bible as to, yeah, this is dangerous. I mean, you go to 1 Corinthians 6:18, Paul says, flee sexual immorality because it's a sin against the body. But you can read that and just kind of go, oh, well, he says that, but I'm with my girlfriend and I'm just going to do what I want, or nothing is going to, I'm not going to hurt myself by just looking at a few pictures of masturbating. Okay. That's untrue. You do hurt yourself. And here's the thing, when men become married and they suddenly desperately want to live up to this wonderful woman that they have married, they suddenly get very concerned about their sexuality. They get very concerned about getting things under control so that they can be worthy of this great woman that God has given them. The second thing is they start having kids and they're like me. They're in bed screaming at the ceiling silently, going, God, what in the world were you thinking to give me any kids? I mean, I don't know how I'm going to help them. Okay. So they're desperate. Okay. But before they're married, uh, there's nothing riding on it. I mean, teens are just saying, I'm going to practice with the next 5 girls because that's how men become men. No, that's how men step out of manhood because then you get into these bad habits that you take into marriage that you get desperate over. And so I would spend more time also in the books talking about the desperation that comes later if you don't pay attention now. And I wrote a book called Preparing Your Son for Every Man's Battle. But it's actually, if you read the material in it, it's preparing your sons and daughters for every man and woman's battle. Because I taught about a process where you can go through books with your kids and I taught a process in detail about how to actually pass on these truths to your kids. When we go into Deuteronomy 6, and most of us remember at least shades of this verse that talks about the fact that we are to talk to our kids about the truths of God when we get up in the morning, when we go through our day, and when we go to bed at night. And what that verse is really talking about is teach your children how to use scripture in their day-to-day lives. So they don't have to just guess. I mean, teach them how you do it so that they can do it. And the whole process then behind the whole concept behind preparing your son, preparing your daughter is to um, have a steady, ongoing process where you're talking about the biggest, most difficult aspects of their life, their sexuality, their relationships with the opposite gender, and teach them what you went through so that they know that you know where they live. And then also to teach them that you weren't perfect, and but that this is how you've now learned, and so that they're not going into this making all the same stupid mistakes you made. They can actually learn from their mistakes and keep from making mistakes of their own. I'll never forget how many times I was going through books with my kids and they would start chuckling and they would say, I can tell you one thing, Dad, I don't want to be like you. Okay, because I'm sharing stories from high school. And I don't, and they're saying, I don't want to go through the pain you went through. And that's good for them to hear. And God knows that's good for them to hear. That's why he talked about it in Deuteronomy 6. So in answer to your question, those are some of the things that I feel, first of all, how I would change those books, but also what parents can do. And I would just urge you to pick up a copy of Preparing Your Son. And the whole parent section in that book is all about teaching you how to not just deal with your sons, but your daughters too, so that they can get close enough to you that your voice is louder than all of their friends' voices, and they can stand against the culture, which is what you're trying to help them do.
Thanks, Fred. I really appreciate this. I mean, you minister to men all over the world about sexual addiction and recovery. I'm a missionary to men. I wrote a book about ministering to men that is about ministering to men. Last thought before we wrap up. Can you help me? As part of this, and then I'll share this to social media. What's happening with women right now in culture regarding sexual addiction and recovery, porn and masturbation?
Well, I can tell you that before the MTV generation, women really didn't struggle with sexual addiction. I remember growing up in the 70s. That gives you a little idea of how old I am. I'm 67. And I was growing up in a time where, Playboy magazine had then brought out Playgirl magazine, thinking that they could approach women with that same process of, having static naked pictures, not moving, just static naked pictures, and somehow that attracting women. Well, Playgirl magazine went belly up. I mean, there was just no interest in women to look at static naked pictures. And I've often thought about that because I remember walking with my daughters through the mall and, they would be 10, 8, 12, whatever. And they'd go by the Abercrombie and Fitch stores, that always had these guys with six packs and no shirts on, big pictures of them. And when they would go by, it wasn't like they were looking up into those pictures and gasping and going, they were giggling, they were laughing. So, what do you put their shirts on? What are they doing? Okay, so there's a complete difference between genders when it comes to just looking at nudity in a static picture. However, female sexuality is very relational. Okay. And so if you can find a way to tie relationship in to the porn, that's going to hook them. And that's exactly what the pornographers finally figured out. Once streaming porn was possible, which was especially in the 2000s, okay, where you could have the whole nudity stuff all tied into a romantic storyline, that's when the women got hooked. Why? Well, when they're looking at that, and they do get then excited because, again, their sexuality is has to do with relationships. They end up masturbating, and the same chemistry that hits men hits them. All right. And so that same addictive chemistry where they begin to deal with life's problems through masturbation and orgasmic chemistry instead of through their connection with God. And so, what has happened is that as streaming porn has exploded, addictions in women have exploded. And they're struggling because they don't understand it. Essentially, that second vulnerability that I talked about in men, that is the main vulnerability in female sexuality, where they begin to deal with their loneliness, their feelings of lack of self-worth, their stress, their father wounds, all those things. They stress, they deal with those with that same masturbation, porn, chemistry, just to medicate that pain. But the thing is, they can't really put two and two together. They don't always know that it's their father wounds that are driving that porn and masturbation. And so they just think, like the guys have always done, they just think they're kind of perverts and they don't love God enough and they don't pray enough. But in reality, what's happening is they're dealing with the pain in their lives through their sexuality. And in Battle on, Battle Over, I'll show it to you once again. You see a husband and wife winning this battle together. But as you can see here, um, they're winning together. And in that book, you'll also notice that Brenda and I wrote that book together. And I had Brenda write chapter 3, which is okay. We talk about the second vulnerability for the first 5 chapters. So there's a lot of discussion about it. Uh, but we take chapter 3 and we talk only about women and what they're facing. And I put in emails from women. I put in questions from women, and we talk about it from the female perspective, although it's mostly in Brenda's voice, of course. And because women want to hear from women when it comes to this issue. And women understand that their sexuality is relational. But what we're trying to do is to help women see that we're trying to help them connect the dots as to why this is exploding. It's not just because America is becoming even grosser. It's it's because it's being presented now to women in a way that's impacting their type of sexuality, their relational sexuality. And so they're going to have to learn to do the same things that the men have learned to do in dealing with the pain in their lives in a more effective way, not through masturbation, not through porn, but through a deeper connection with the Lord and a deeper understanding of intimacy with the Lord. Does that
Hmm.
make sense?
It does. Fred, I'm so grateful for this time. You and I have talked about this often. I get guys in their 20s and 30s, and I
Yes.
hear about gals that are in their 20s, 30s that say they started when they were in their teens. And I'm hearing more and more of men and women that are getting out of high school and college and saying uh, they've been addicted and started when they were 8, 9, 10 years old. And that is the frontier in ministry. And when I minister to men and to the women they care about. And you and I, we could talk about this for another hour. I'm
Well,
grateful for this.
I do want to respond to that, Phil, and I'll
Yeah.
do it real briefly. Um, it's very easy for us when we are, say, 56 years old to say, I've had this sin since I was 16, so 40 years. It's very easy for us as men, as women, to say to ourselves, oh, I've been addicted all this time. There's no hope for me. I just want men and women to know, I've had 70-year-old people say, I'm free, with all kinds of exclamation points in their emails. And they've been hooked since they were teens. Okay. Here's the thing, the way God seems to have created our bodies is that we can literally, if we stop the porn, if we stop the masturbation, we literally return to original specs. Okay, I said our behaviors change our brain and the way we process sexuality. I've helped a lot of guys here around Des Moines where they can't even get erections with their wives in bed because they've looked at so much porn over time, and there's no way a physical woman, can ever take us to the intense heights that porn and our own hand can do. Our hand is tied to our nervous system. Um, every time we need to be touched in a certain different way, we know to do it and we can do it instantly. our wives, they're not going to ever be able to do that because they're not tied to our nervous system. So, you know, if we're just dealing with reaching the most intense highs possible, that's what men are trying to do, and that's where their brains get warped. But if they say, no, I want a deeper soul connection with my wife, I want to be able to please God, if they stop all that, their sexuality reverts back to original specs, which is that connection. Well, the Bible never talks about sex except in the context of two. It never talks about sex in the context of one or sex with yourself. So, what happens is we go back to the original specs, which is a focus on the other, a focus on a consummating sexual experience that's peaceful and wonderful. Okay. And, never a place where our fantasies are getting between us and our wife, that sort of thing. And what happens is it can take a few months, maybe 4 months, 9 months, whatever. But at some point, you'll be able then to get erections again with your wife, because you're totally focused on her and that connection in the soul. So I just want people to understand, no, even if you get to that point where you can't even have an erection with your wife, um, you can be free, and it will revert back to the way God intended it. And full restoration is possible. So don't be, like I said earlier, like everyone that says, this war can't be fought. It's useless. Then you're just being like the 10 spies that went into the promised land and said, oh, yeah, it's a land flowing with milk and honey, but wow, the giants, oh, we can't do anything. Oh, yes, you can. You need to be like Caleb and Joshua and just say, I'm strapping on my sword. I'm winning because the Lord's already out there waiting on the battlefield for me to show up. He's looking at his watch. When's Fred going to get here? And then when you get there, he's ready to fight, you're ready to fight, and you'll win. Okay, because he's God and the enemy is not. So I just want to encourage you. So kind of share that with you that way.
If you're watching or listening, Fred and I really do talk like this when we're not recording
Yeah, yeah,
on
we really
his
do.
on his podcast. And then last word from me. Fred, thank you for having me as a guest on your podcast.
Oh yeah.
Follow Fred on YouTube, his YouTube channel. Please subscribe. Follow him on Instagram as well. Buy the book Every Man's Battle. Buy the book Battle on Battle Over. Share it with friends who are even maybe just slightly hinting they have a challenge sexually. It works. Thank you, Fred, for having me as your guest. Bless you, brother. Appreciate you.
Bless you, Phil. It's been an honor. It really has.